In 1932, Australia found itself in a strange and almost comical conflict, one that involved the Australian military, farmers, and an army of flightless birds. This bizarre chapter of history is known as the Great Emu War, and it remains an oddity that blends humor with the stark reality of the country's socio-economic struggles during the Great Depression. What began as a military operation to deal with a pest problem turned into a national embarrassment as the Australian military was defeated by thousands of resilient emus. The origins of the Great Emu War. To fully understand the Great Emu War, we need to travel back to the aftermath of World War I, a period when Australia was dealing with the devastating effects of the war. Australia, a nation with a population of less than 5 million, had lost over 61,000 soldiers and suffered more than 150,000 casualties during the war. Many of the returning soldiers were physically or mentally scarred and struggled to reintegrate into civilian life. To address the pressing needs of returning veterans and boost the country's agricultural production, the government devised a resettlement scheme. The idea was to distribute small plots of land to the veterans, encouraging them to become farmers. In theory, this plan would help the war heroes rebuild their lives while also contributing to the country's food supply. However, the reality was far different. The land allocated to the veterans was often poor, with unsuitable soil and inadequate resources. Additionally, many of the soldiers had no prior experience in farming. Each plot of land was a mere 10 acres, barely enough for subsistence, let alone profitable farming. As the 1920s progressed, the government scheme began to unravel, and the country's agricultural crisis deepened. In Western Australia, where many of the veterans were settled, the situation was particularly dire. Wheat prices collapsed, and the ongoing drought further devastated the land. The farmers struggled to grow crops and faced a host of challenges, from pests to limited resources. However, there was one specific pest causing even more problems: the emu. Emus, the flightless invaders. The emu, a large, flightless bird native to Australia, has long been a national symbol. Tall, with dark brown feathers and a distinctive flightless appearance, the emu was viewed as a cherished symbol of Australia's unique wildlife. However, in the early 20th century, the emu was seen as a menace to the farming community. As the emu population grew exponentially, these birds began to wreak havoc on crops, especially wheat. The emu problem was first noted in 1918, when their numbers began to surge. By 1922, the government had reclassified the emu from a protected species to a pest, allowing farmers to take action. However, the farmers' attempts to deal with the birds on their own were largely ineffective. Emus are surprisingly resilient creatures, tough and capable of enduring multiple gunshots before succumbing to their injuries. As the emu population continued to grow, it caused serious damage to crops. Farmers reported emus trampling over fields, eating newly planted seeds, and destroying fences and water troughs. The emus were everywhere, and no one seemed able to stop them. By 1932, the situation had reached a crisis point. The farmers, already struggling with poor yields and economic hardship, turned to the government for help. The military is called in. In the face of mounting pressure, the Australian government decided to take a drastic step to resolve the issue. They called in the military. The plan was simple. The military would deploy soldiers to Western Australia to eliminate the emu threat. The Minister for Defence, George Pearce, authorized the operation, and on November 2, 1932, a small force of soldiers from the Royal Australian Artillery, led by Major Gwyn Meredith, set off to confront the emu hordes. The soldiers were equipped with Lewis machine guns, which were capable of rapid fire. Accompanied by a cinematographer from Fox Movie Tone, the military's mission was clear: eradicate the emu problem. It was expected to be a straightforward task. After all, how could a mere bird withstand the firepower of the Australian military? The start of the Great Emu War. The first encounter between the soldiers and the emus was on November 2nd, 1932, near the town of Chandler. The military's strategy was to herd the emus into a trap. With the help of local farmers, the soldiers set up an ambush, hoping to shoot as many emus as possible. However, the emus had other plans. Instead of gathering together in a group, they scattered in all directions, making them incredibly difficult to target. The military's initial attempt was a failure. Even when they managed to trap a small group of emus, the birds proved remarkably evasive. As the soldiers tried to open fire, the emus darted in various directions, evading the gunfire. After a few days, only around 30 emus had been killed, despite the presence of thousands of birds. This poor result was hardly a dent in the massive emu population. The battle continues. Realizing the difficulty of controlling such a large and agile population, Major Meredith and his team tried different tactics. On November 4th, they set up an ambush at a dam where they hoped to catch a large group of emus as they approached the water. The soldiers positioned themselves ready to fire at point-blank range. However, their machine guns jammed after only a few rounds, leaving them with little success. By November 8th, the emus had learned to avoid the areas where the military had set up. The emus had not only evaded the soldiers' attempts at mass slaughter, but they had also adopted a guerrilla strategy, breaking into smaller groups and sending out sentinels to watch for danger. The military's efforts were further hampered by rough terrain, which made it difficult for the soldiers to transport their equipment, including the mounted machine gun on a truck. The rough roads hindered the soldiers' ability to gain speed and precision, and the machine gun proved ineffective when fired from a moving vehicle. Media reaction and public perception. By now, the press had caught wind of the operation, and the reports painted a picture of a military force outwitted by birds. What was supposed to be a serious operation quickly became the subject of ridicule. Headlines began to mock the army's inability to defeat the birds, comparing the situation to a cartoonish chase between soldiers and emus. The media coverage highlighted the absurdity of the entire operation, and public opinion turned against the military. The emus, far from being pests, became the symbols of resilience and cunning. The Australian public found the whole affair both entertaining and embarrassing. The end of the operation. On November 13th, 1932, after weeks of failed attempts and growing public ridicule, Major Meredith and his team were withdrawn from the field. The official report claimed that 986 emus had been killed. But many of these claims are disputed, with experts suggesting the number may have been exaggerated. It's believed that many of the birds wounded by the soldiers likely escaped and died later. Despite the military's claims of success, the emu population continued to thrive. In the following years, the emus continued to destroy crops, forcing farmers to request government assistance again in 1934, 1943, and 1948. However, their requests were met with refusal each time. The aftermath. The military's failure in the Great Emu War did not immediately solve the emu problem. However, it did pave the way for a more practical solution: barrier fencing. The establishment of emu-proof fences helped contain the birds and reduce their impact on farmland. Over time, the emu population was brought under control, though not through military intervention. The legacy of the Great Emu War lives on in Australian culture. While many view it as a humorous and absurd episode in history, it also highlights the hardships faced by farmers in the early 20th century. For many, the war against the emus symbolized the larger struggles of a country trying to recover from the trauma of war and the Great Depression. The Emu War in popular culture. In the years following the Great Emu War, the tale of the military's failure against the emus became a beloved source of entertainment. In 2019, a musical adaptation of the story was workshopped, and a 2023 action comedy film based on the events of the Great Emu War further cemented the incident's place in popular culture. The internet, too, has embraced the story, creating memes and humorous takes on the event. Despite its humorous legacy, the Great Emu War remains a cautionary tale. It serves as a reminder of the unforeseen consequences of human intervention in nature and the resilience of the animals that inhabit our world. In the end, the emus may have won the battle, but their victory remains an important and amusing part of Australia's history. And that's the strange and hilarious tale of the Great Emu War, where flightless birds defeated the Australian military. If you enjoyed this quirky piece of history, make sure to give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more fascinating stories from the past. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.